That's all.
Please rise for the national anthem.
Hello everybody. What a great thing to see a crowd of people gathered again. Can we just applaud for that? And thank you to Amy Walgren for leading us in the national anthem tonight as well. Thank you, Amy. Let's clap for that. So I am Betsy Broder, and I am the Executive Director of the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center, and I'm just so pleased to welcome you all here tonight. The Cultural Center is a multidisciplinary art center. We do a little bit of everything. We're in a small rural town, so we're kind of everything for everyone. We have a visual art space. We do a performing arts series, classes, workshops. We have an artist residency program, a sculpture park. We do events like this, the Great American Think-Off, and other events like the Fish House Festival in July, the Puppet Pageant in August, and the Longest Night Music Festival every December. And I just can't say enough how happy I am to be able to do this work again. It's been a tough stretch in the business that we're in, and so to be gathering and connecting with people and making memories together, that is what really is at the root of the work that we do. So just so happy to be here and want to thank you all for coming. I have some other thanks to make, and some of them are on the back page of your program. So there, I'm going to first just thank our Think-Off committee. So we have a group of people who really do a lot of the work for this event. They help decide on the question each year. They read essays and select the finalists, and they write the questions for the debate. So big thanks goes out to that group. Alice Martin has been the chair of that committee for years, and she's just a wonderful leader in the event. So thanks to Alice and to everyone in the committee. I also want to thank staff, board, and volunteers. So this is a pretty big weekend for us, and there's a lot of work that goes into preparing for it. And so I just want to say a sincere thanks to everybody who steps up and makes it come to life. I also want to thank the Cub Scouts. I think that's kind of a cool thing with the Great American Think-Off and following the rules. Our topic this year, we have the Boy Scouts here to keep us honest and collecting ballots. So thanks to them, they'll be here shortly, I'm hoping. And then to the Whistle Stop Bed and Breakfast for housing our finalists. And Jan Lee has just been a generous supporter forever, the owner, and it's a wonderful place. I know it's full the Think-Off weekend, but you should come back and stay with us again at the Whistle Stop. It's a really cool experience. And I also want to thank Grassroots in Otter Tail for providing the flowers tonight. They allow us to use these every year to beautify our stage, and it's just another neighborly thing that happens in rural Minnesota, and I'm really grateful to Tom and the whole crew at Grassroots. Thanks to our finalists, our honorable mentions who are in the program, and to everyone who wrote an essay and continue to make the Think-Off a viable event. It takes people getting engaged in the question and entering to be able to continue to do this. Also to the media and press. So we really do a lot of work to try to tell this story of the work that happens in our small rural town. And so I want to thank the people that pick it up. We had a story in the Washington Post this year, which was pretty exciting, and the writer is a Minnesotan. And so I just want to thank Leah and the Washington Post for that article, and that we did decide to live stream the event tonight on YouTube, and so you'll be able to see this afterwards as well. So one more thanks to all of you who are attending. So we really, this idea of civil debate is important to us, and cultivating the arts and creativity in rural America. And it only works if people show up. So I want to say thanks to all of you for showing up, whether you're in the auditorium tonight or if you're logging on online. I really appreciate you taking the time to connect with people here if you're here in person, and to keep an open mind as you hear the debate tonight. For those of you who are tuning in online, we're just really happy to reach a more broad audience, and we appreciate your interest in the Great American Think-Off, and we of course invite you to make a contribution if you're able as well to help continue this work. So the Think-Off is a celebration of civil debate. We've been doing this for 28 years, and it's more important now than ever, and I think we can all understand that. It's kind of hard to have conversations sometimes with our friends and neighbors. And so we really feel this is an important thing that we continue to talk about how we can have these civil conversations. John Noldler is an American photographer and peace activist who was a visiting artist at the Cultural Center in 2013. He's a photographer, and he also wrote a book called A Piece of My Mind, like a piece of my mind. And he went around and photographed people and asked them to tell the story of what peace means to them. He says, in a world that asks us to focus on the things that can separate us, A Piece of My Mind invites us to explore the common humanity that connects us. This resonates with the work that we're doing at the Think-Off and at the Cultural Center. We recently interviewed John online for a virtual interview. Cheryl Vanis, our programs director, had a great conversation with him, and he gave this really simple but profound advice. When you're talking to people, listen simply to listen. That really stuck with me. He went on to say, when I'm having some of these difficult conversations, I don't have to win. I don't have to change the other person's mind. More important is hearing what's on the other person's mind. Now, while that might not be the best advice for our finalists tonight, I do think it is pretty good general advice for the rest of us so that we can continue to have civil conversations in our real lives. And also for the audience tonight, I encourage you all to be open to new ideas and thoughts and really listen to listen. And you're going to be voting for who you think makes the best argument tonight. So not necessarily what the belief that you came in with, but really listen to the argument. So thank you again for joining us tonight. I hope you all enjoy the debate, and I hope that you join us afterwards for a reception back at the Cultural Center to celebrate the finalists and coming together again. And now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator. Tammy, I already forgot how to, I just asked her how to say her name. Vigasa. It's a tough last name. Tammy Vigasa. Tammy and I just met in person today. She's a sociology instructor at M State, and she lives in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, with her family. She's also the co-host of the Flyover Logic podcast. Everyone needs to Google that after this, okay? It's a really interesting podcast. She and her friend, Mike, discuss current events and work through hot-button issues while modeling productive conversations between two people with different political views. What a perfect fit for the Think Off, right? So we're so happy to have Tammy here. The podcast was born during the lockdown stage of the pandemic last spring, and it's quickly become a favorite hobby. Tammy enjoys reading and almost anything outdoors, lives in Minnesota for the summers, where you can typically find her floating in a pool or on the lake with a glass of iced tea. Please help me welcome Tammy.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Tammy Vigasa, and I'm just so excited to be a part of this event. It's a little ironic to me to be the rule enforcer in an event where we're debating rules, right? And whether we should have them at all. So kind of an interesting question for us. First of all, before we get started, I would just ask you to remember to check your cell phones, make sure that they are powered off or silenced. We do want you to be active on social media. If you have social media accounts, let your friends know where you are and that you're having a great time. Just turn off the noise so we don't hear all of the wonderful responses that you get. Okay, a couple of notes about how the evening will go. We will have a couple of rounds up top. So the first round, we will have two people arguing on the side that says winning is more important. They're going to read their essays for you, present their arguments. We'll have a little bit of debate between the two presenters, and then you're going to have a chance to vote as far as who you think presented the stronger argument. You can find your ballots on the second page of your program. You'll need those for the round 1 and round 2. Second round, the other two people who are arguing on the side of playing by the rules will read their essays, present their arguments, we'll have a little debate, and then you're going to cast your ballots for that as well. We do have a timekeeper who will be making sure that the contestants stay within the allotted time frame. They'll get a little warning, and then they're going to have a little bell go off if they go outside of that time. We're not going to shut off their mics right away, but we will make sure that they just finish that one thought, and then we can move on so that everybody gets their turn. And then we'll have an intermission. We're going to tally the ballots, and then the third round will come back. The winners of the first and second round will debate each other. The audience members will then vote for which debater made the strongest argument. And during the earlier rounds, you will have a chance after each to submit a question for our final round if you would like. So we would just encourage you to do that. If you think of a question while you're listening to the essays or while we are asking them the prepared questions, you can submit your question during the time that we're collecting your ballots. Then we'll have a short intermission to tally the winners of the final round, and then we will award medals. All right? Okay, let's get started. Round 1 again, each debater is going to read their essays for us, and then we'll hear some back and forth. In this round, we have Angela and AJ. You want to come on up? determined that Angela will read her essay first. And then also that means that she will receive the first question after both essays have been finished. So Angela, whenever you are ready.
Okay. It is more important to win. My first inclination when thinking on the topic was that it was more important to play by the rules. My gut response automatically extrapolated from more important to win to most important to win. And I reacted strongly by thinking that winning cannot be the most important thing in our lives, in the world. That would validate exploitation, cheating, profiteering, selfishness, and self-indulgence as more important than justice, generosity, empathy, and compassion. Based on that personal identification, I absolutely rejected winning as being more important than following the rules. I wanted a more just and compassionate world rather than a more exploitive and self-indulgent world. And then I was discussing the question with my friend Courtney on our usual lunchtime walk, and that led to a reversal in my position. My earlier perspective had all been on rejecting winning as most important. By reducing the contrast to most rather than more, I had not considered at all the relative desirability of following the rules. If a more just and compassionate world was more important than winning, why wasn't it worth breaking the rules to attain those things? As a result, I completely flipped my view on which was more important, but for exactly the same reasons and values. What if the rules are unjust and need to be broken? If something is really worth fighting for, it may well be worth breaking the rules for. Many people I consider heroes are heroes especially because they broke the rules. Think Rosa Parks, suffragettes, freedom riders, lunch counter sitters, and countless others, all breaking rules that needed to be broken. Fighting with the wind at your back is one thing. Fighting facing into headwinds against the establishment, the norms, the rules against you is quite something different. This, of course, takes the entire argument down the path of whether it is better, or at least sufficient, to make the necessary changes through the process following the rules rather than breaking the rules. With all of those examples above, the changes in civil rights did happen through the regular processes, but only after extraordinary pressures were put onto that system by the rule breakers. Our complex bureaucracy, our privileged comfort in the status quo, our complacency, all put the brakes on making many of these changes. The rule breakers can force society's foot on the gas. Sometimes that is needed. I am inherently a rule follower. I guess that's a good thing, but as I write this, I'm not entirely sure it is something of which to be proud. I'm a good, law-abiding, rule-following citizen. I certainly have volunteered, marched, protested, but always within the rules. I very often wonder whether I would have the strength and courage of those who hid and protected people during the Holocaust, or of the freedom riders. I have never been tested like that, and I don't know where I would come out. But I do know whom I admire and how I hope I would come out. Now, this does not mean that I value winning at all costs, or winning for the sake of winning, or just winning anything at all, or that I think rules are unimportant or are meant to be broken. I certainly have boundaries I cannot imagine crossing, such as using violence or harming anyone. I see cases in the news of people fighting for their cause, multiple actions by Ammon Bundy out west, abortion opponents bombing clinics and murdering doctors, and I just see the violence or the contempt of society. But I'm sure they see their actions as justifiable rule breaking in defense of a just cause. It does come down to a matter of context and conscience for each of us, but I came to realize that winning might be an act of conscience and not just victory, and that following the rules could be an act of complacency or even complicity rather than just duty or respect. For some causes, winning isn't just more important or most important, it might be everything. Thank you.
hear from AJ.
If you don't win, then the rules will keep you losing. I'm saddened by this debate topic because it says a great deal about our society and what we value. If we value winning over the rules, then we admit the rules are obstacles to winning. If we value the rules over winning, we're still saying that the rules prevent winning. It's purely a transactional society. You either follow the rules or you get everything you can. The problem really is that the debate proposition ignores one main fact. The rules are made by the winners. For that reason, I have to come down firmly on the side of win. I started my professional career as a loser. I graduated law school in May of 2008, full of promise. I passed the bar that year in October, feeling much less optimistic. It took me a full year to find full-time work because the economic collapse had flooded the job market with experienced attorneys, and I was newly minted. During that year of looking, I was angry. I'd gone to a good professional school. I'd taken out loans. I'd done the work to get into a quote-unquote safe career. I'd followed the rules, and yet, through no fault of my own, I had failed. The real irony, the people who collapsed the economy also followed the rules. Every subprime mortgage, every credit default swap, and bundled security that collapsed the economy was perfectly within the rules. Those rules were made by people who'd already won the market, but wanted to win more. They leveraged their money into access, and their access into legislation and regulations. They won, they made the rules, and most of us lost. When the very entities who created financial ruin looked like they might lose, they invented a new rule, the concept of too big to fail. The winners made new rules to make sure they stayed the winners. When I eventually found a full-time attorney job, I ended up working in immigration, a field I never studied nor intended to practice. The thing you realize quickly about the law in general, and immigration law in particular, is that the law is made to pick winners and losers. Every trial has a winner and loser. Every law is written by congresspeople who'd won their elections. Every constitutional principle is defined by parties who won their arguments in an appellate court. In immigration, the winners and losers are implicit, like the asylum seeker who loses and gets deported. Watching someone whose decision to follow the rules led them to lose everything puts the rules and winning in stark contrast. It's even more stark when the losers are made explicit in the law. For example, country quotas or the Chinese Exclusion Act. Whether the rules are within an organization or set by an internal hierarchy, or those rules are passed by elected officials, the rulemakers got there by winning. The only way to change the rules, then, is to win. Every major civil rights shift has started because the rules were challenged. The very concept of civil disobedience prioritizes winning over the rules when the rules need changing. Rosa Parks is not celebrated for her rule following, but she definitely won. The question shouldn't be whether the rules or winning are more important. The question should always be, are the rules any good? The way you ensure that the rules are good are by fighting for good rules and by winning. You have to win public opinion, official positions, elections, and court cases. Ultimately, the goal should be harmony between winning and the rules. If, however, following the rules and winning are truly a dichotomy, winning must be prioritized in the name of crafting better rules. Winning matters because it's the only way to get rules worth following.
All right, thank you, AJ. We will begin our question round. And again, I will present the question to each contestant. That contestant has 2 minutes for a response. The opposing contestant will have 1 minute as a follow-up, and then we will take turns and switch. Okay? You ready? All right. First question goes to Angela. If our individual conscience should be the guide as to when to follow the rules and when to break them in pursuit of what we think is a greater good, why have rules at all? Why doesn't your position legitimize what is known as the Hobbesian nightmare, where society is motivated by unrestrained, selfish, and uncivilized competition?
Okay, well, I did say I do believe in rules. I think an orderly society does need rules. I do support rule breaking, but not with impunity. I think the rules are important and following the rules are important, and if people are going to break the rules, there should be consequences. And that context and conscience comes in how we decide for ourselves whether we're willing to pay those consequences. You know, Rosa Parks is famous partly for her mugshot because she was arrested. Martin Luther King Jr., one of his famous writings is letters from a Birmingham jail. The Freedom Riders were beaten, they were imprisoned. I think most of us have probably seen footage in Myanmar of protesters being shot by the military in the street. So I believe in consequences, and why we each need to decide for ourselves is whether it's worth it to us individually to pay that consequence.
And then to you, AJ, for 1 minute of a response.
Yeah, I think that the question presupposes the idea that we're suggesting anarchy up here, which is obviously not the case. I don't think either Angela nor myself is saying a ruleless society is the answer. I think we are saying, though, that every person has overarching principles that they need to follow, and that when the rules are made by the winners. And that's why I came down the way I did. I don't think I'm arguing for anarchy. I'm arguing for the best possible rules so that the most people can win.
The next question goes to AJ. So again, you'll have 2 minutes to respond.
Mhm.
You're in a card game or a tennis match or some other competitive endeavor with a close friend. You are soundly defeating your friend over and over to the point that he or she is so dejected that they are ready to quit. You're actually feeling a little guilty for consistently winning, so you throw a game and let them win. You've broken the rules of game playing. If it's more important to win, can it be justified to not play by the rules in order to lose out of kindness or compassion? Why or why not?
I think that could absolutely be justified. I think that part of the issue is that you look at the overarching principle, and in this case, it's not making your friend cry. I think we can all agree that that's a nice thing to do. I would agree with doing that, and I would be okay with losing a game. I also don't think that I would be breaking any rules of competition by failing to win. You know, if I'm throwing a game for money, maybe that's a different story, and that's probably a little more dicey. But if I'm just trying to keep my friend upbeat and not totally destroy their confidence, I think that's reasonable. Again, my position is not that we should always value the rules or always value winning. My position is that we need to value winning in order to ensure that we make the best possible rules. And so in that case, I would say losing supports a principle that is more important to me than winning that game.
And then to you, Angela, for 1 minute.
And yes, I would agree. I mean, as I said, I don't believe in winning at all costs or winning anything at all. And in a case where, you know, it's not money on the game or professional sports or something like that, friendship would be more important than winning. And also, you know, the dignity of somebody else and their feelings, the empathy that I value would trump trying to win.
Thank you. The next question goes to Angela. You argue that it is a matter of context and conscience to determine if rules should be respected or overturned. Is conscience a creation of environment, aka context, or is it an absolute?
I believe it's a matter of context, not an absolute. I think, you know, throughout time, right and wrong, and, you know, it varies from society to society and through time. I believe I learned my values that my conscience is based on probably more from my parents than from anybody else. And so I have my belief in what is right and wrong, and so that supplies some of the context. And then when I would think about whether to break the rules, sometimes, you know, it's a matter of, would what my action actually make a difference? Then there's what is the cost, the consequence of that action? And then my personal conscience as to whether I was willing to pay that price.
Right, and to you, AJ.
Yeah, I don't believe in, I'm not going to fall into the trap of moral relativism and say that all moral questions are equal and all moral views are equal. I don't necessarily believe that. I do have principles of my own, but I also won't fall into Kantian absolutism, that there are absolute principles. For example, we can say you shouldn't lie, but what if your grandmother gives you socks for Christmas? Nobody wants socks. It's okay to lie then, you know what I mean? Like, that's fine. I don't think that we have to have absolute principles, and I think the context shapes it, but I also think that we should have principles that we hold dear, and when the rules run counter to those principles, then we have to win to change those rules.
question goes to you, AJ. You assert that the basic question is, are the rules any good? But who gets to decide what good rules are? Each of us individually, or is that the definition of chaos?
I don't think you can have the absolute definition of the rules for each person, but that's also why I, in my essay, invoke the concept of civil disobedience. Because the notion is, yes, I will break the rules in service of what I think are making more important and better rules, in service of moral principles that I believe in. But if I break those rules in the context of civil disobedience, I have to be willing to accept the consequences of that. So it's not an idea of going out and saying, destroy all the rules and you can't do anything to me. It is saying, I will break these rules to establish that the rules are unfair and that they need to be changed. Thoreau himself, one of the progenitors of civil disobedience, went out and voted in an election without paying a poll tax, because he said that the poll tax was absolutely unfair, and that the poll tax was preventing people from voting, and it was an impediment that was unnecessary and immoral. So he voted without paying the poll tax, and then he got arrested for voting without paying the poll tax, and he knew he was going to get arrested. But the point of breaking the rules there was to highlight the injustice of the poll tax and to make sure that everybody knew that there was a moral problem out there that needed to be fixed and a rule that needed to be changed.
Thank you. And a response, Angela?
And yes, I think, the rules still actually get changed through the process that we have as part of our government and our democratic processes. And part of breaking the rules, it's about highlighting where rules need to be changed, putting on a focus, putting on pressure. The status quo seldom gives easily, readily, and quickly to change. But the protesters and civil disobedience can put a little pressure towards trying to get those rules changed and improved.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our question round. Now each contestant will have 1 minute to make a closing statement. Since Angela won the coin toss, she will go first.
I go first?
Yes.
I agree with my opponent that winning is a priority in order to create better rules. But I do not think that the need for breaking the rules at times will ever totally disappear. There will always be problems with some of the rules, even those put in place with good intent. Societies are dynamic entities, always changing. Issues inspiring rule breaking have included women voting, interracial marriage, and marriage equality. Our struggles change with time, and we are constantly learning more about each other's struggles, and that makes it harder for us to just stand by. Democracy is a work in progress. That work is never done, and so neither will the need for protest, for breaking the rules, go away. To quote the late great Congressman John Lewis, our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble.
Thank you. And 1 minute for you, AJ.
Again, I want to reiterate that I'm not in opposition to having rules, and I don't think that winning at all costs is any way to proceed. I think that winning at all costs, that mindset is dangerous and harmful, and it's not the view that I have. But I also recognize that if you want to change and you want better rules, you must win. Just period, you must win. And you have to appeal to people's judgment. You have to appeal to their better conscience, and you have to appeal to their moral center. But you never win without, you never can get better rules without winning, flat out. You have to somehow win. Now, hopefully you can win in the process, and like I said, that means winning elections. That means winning over judges. But if you can't win in that way, then you have to break the rules in order to highlight injustices. As Frederick Douglass once said, power concedes nothing without a demand. And sometimes that demand must be made forcefully. But that demand is made forcefully and made in service of better rules. Therefore, I believe that you must win because you must have that victory in order to have the best rules.
Okay, thank you. All right, that concludes round one. It is time for you to cast your votes for the first round. Again, you'll find those ballots on page 2 of your program. Go ahead and vote. Also, if you have any questions that came to mind that you'd like to pose to either of these contestants should they make it to the final along with your ballot. All right, we have some fabulous scouts here tonight to come along and take your ballots, so you can look for them in the aisles coming through now. Voting is just about completed. Thank you again to the scouts for coming through. Our second round will be very similar to the first, but we will be hearing from the opposite end of the argument. So we have Daniel and Bill, if you will please come forward. And you'll notice that I'm not pronouncing last names. I have a strange enough last name on my own, so I'm just asking you to read their bios. It's all in your program for you, so I apologize for that. All right, so again, we will hear the essays from both of these contestants, and then we will have some questions after that. A coin toss has determined that Daniel will read his essay first, and also that means he will take the first question in the debate. So let's begin.
All right, I don't think anyone but my mother has called me Daniel for a number of years. But
I should have asked for nicknames.
winning provides temporary gratification, but playing by the rules results in enduring success. As a lawyer and later as a high school teacher, I have long been a believer in the rule of law. But playing by the rules means more than following the law. It means respecting fundamental human values like love thy neighbor and the golden rule. From Confucius, James Madison, and Martin Luther King, to the fictional George Bailey and Hannah Montana, playing by the rules has proven the best way to ensure liberty and justice for all. In the world of education, an A is evidence of winning. Some students who I have caught cheating have correctly and with 100% sincerity responded, "I thought you wanted me to get an A." Adolescents with limited life experience often recognize the value of achievement, but have difficulty comprehending the greater purpose of education. The education system feeds into this misconception by citing standardized tests and graduation rates as proof of success. Unfortunately, this leads to quantifying education, or this need to quantify education leads to lowered standards and teaching to the test. It does not result in greater understanding. Like Nigel Tufnell and Spinal Tap, it is simply turning the volume up to 11. I added that part. I think I'm the only one who gets it. Learning through playing by the rules is a complex, long-term process. The A by itself is not the goal. Rather, the grade provides an incentive to think, listen, develop good study habits, and persevere. School is not just about winning, it's about learning from mistakes. To paraphrase Confucius, our greatest glory comes not in never falling, but in getting up every time we do. Students who challenge themselves through many years of education learn interpersonal skills such as understanding, cooperation, trust, and reciprocity. In short, playing by the rules is the way students develop the social capital necessary for society to function effectively. Because the rules are made by the rich and powerful, one could argue only the privileged few have the luxury of playing by the rules. Therefore, winning is important because it is a necessary prerequisite to changing the rules. This version of winning appeals to our sense of righteous justice, like the vengeful hero in a Clint Eastwood movie or the revolutionary call by any means necessary. However, winning is only a temporary solution that encourages self-interest and perpetuates the cycle of inequity. When I was a lawyer, I worked for two very intelligent judges. Both hailed from conservative professional backgrounds, and both held liberal perspectives regarding social justice. One judge utilized his considerable legal expertise to bend the rules when he felt individuals were being abused by powerful corporate interests. The second judge refused to break the rules even when the results seemed inequitable. He felt the rules were the only consistent way to provide opportunities to the powerless. Without rules, he contended, the strongest always win. Although it is tempting to break the rules for benevolent purposes, it is a temporary solution with significant potential for abuse. As Martin Luther King recognized, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. In politics and economics, winning must also be tempered by playing by the rules. James Madison feared mobs motivated by temporary popular passions, because political factions, then as now, pursue winning at all costs in hopes of furthering what they believe are noble causes. But governments based upon winning ultimately fail because the victors forsake the rule of law in favor of individual interests, quickly eroding faith in the system. Similarly, economic competition provides individual incentives to work hard and improve. But without rules, economic winning becomes simply about making money. It inevitably leads to fraud and exploitation and does not protect the environment, control pandemics, or provide for disaster relief. Without rules, making money is like cheating to get an A. It does not foster long-term economic growth, such as innovation and job creation. By following the rules, we commit to enduring values, not temporary passions. Grades and money must be earned in order to effectuate their underlying purposes. Changing the rules through reform is often slow and imperfect, but it is lasting, while revolutions fade with the whims of their leaders. Although less gratifying than the vigilante justice of Dirty Harry, long-suffering heroes like those portrayed by Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda represent the enduring values of playing by the rules. As Disney's Hannah Montana declared, ain't about how fast we get there, ain't about what's waiting on the other side, it's the climb.
All right, and now we will hear from Bill.
To win or to play by the rules? Fascinating question. Simple, yet sweeping. As a degreed and licensed professional engineer, I have spent a fair portion of a 50-year career practicing in the subspecialty of forensic electrical engineering. Simply put, I and my ilk are called in to investigate and report and frequently testify as an expert witness on instances where a failure or defect in an electrical product or system may have caused or otherwise contributed to personal injury or property damage. Calls for such services are most commonly made by lawyers or insurance carriers whose goal is to blame someone else for the failure or to defend their client or insured from someone who has blamed them. Hence, they have skin in the game. My role in such cases is to try to determine what happened without overmuch concern about who is to blame. Accordingly, I do not have skin in the game, except to the extent I expect to be compensated for time and expense related to my services. A challenge sometimes arises in that the American Bar Association's Code of Conduct, their rule, requires lawyers to place first the interests of their client. On the other hand, the National Society of Professional Engineers, their rule, their code of conduct, requires engineers to place first the protection of the public. So the rules materially differ between key players in the process. Ooh, lost my page here. Parenthetically, note that a forensic engineer is expected to determine a result to what's called a reasonable degree of engineering certainty, which by definition leaves little room for compromise. If any compromise is to happen in a civil matter, it is financial, not scientific, and among the lawyers negotiating within their parallel rules. Occasionally, this difference in worldview can go to extremes. Every now and again, a lawyer would offer to help me write a report or otherwise get involved if the discovered facts happen to not sufficiently align with their interests. And sadly, I am also aware of instances where an engineer may have downplayed or otherwise skewed unhelpful findings. At such times, although someone's rule may have been invoked, in my view, nobody really wins. As an example of the former, several years ago I was involved in the investigation of a nighttime house fire that resulted in multiple fatalities. My analysis concluded that a specific component of the house wiring was the culprit, while the lawyer, my client in this matter, would be better served if the fire had started due to failure of an appliance. Next thing I knew, I was no longer a participant in the case. As an example of the latter, in a large property damage case I was investigating, an engineer neglected to conduct important tests in the hope that the anticipated negative results would not factor into the settlement. A bit esoteric, perhaps, but these instances amply demonstrate that one person's win can be at the expense of another person's rules. These examples, fortunately, represent the exception. One lawyer I worked with several times over the years was once overheard to say rather assertively to their corporate client when being verbally abused for an unfavorable determination by me, quote, "These are not my bleeping facts." Such events, frankly, give me hope. Imperfections in the system notwithstanding, in my experience, good science usually prevails. Why do I do this sort of work with its built-in conflict and drama? I see my role as helping to keep junk science out of the courtroom. That's my personal win. How do I handle the professional pressure should it arise? Some years back, I established 4 tenets for myself to focus on, which are in effect my personal rules. They are awareness, balance, elegance, and gratitude. Properly applied, they always see me through. So, is there a resolution here? Can different humans playing in the same arena by different rules both win? In this narrow slice of Americana, I believe the answer is yes, if the players will have the courage or foresight, or even take the trouble to recognize that within a proactive interpretation of the concept of winning resides a common ground where both rules have value, where winning embraces society-wide benefit and advancement. In short, where the winning is shared. Perhaps in our near-term evolutionary future, such an ideal may come to pass. And if it sounds like I harbor a bias in the matter, perhaps that explains why I pursued a career in engineering rather than the law.
Okay, now we will begin the question round. The first question again goes to Dan. You have 2 minutes for your response. You say, winning is important because it is a necessary prerequisite to changing the rules. But what we are seeing is that many states are trying to change their voting rules to benefit their side in the future. Isn't this because if they played by the rules, they fear they would lose? How then do we distinguish between the drive to win and respect for the rules at such times?
I think that very much highlights why the rules are so important. If you are manipulating the rules or cheating in order to win, you are not following the rules. So if you are going to the point where you're limiting access to voting, you are stopping the rules from actually playing the role they're supposed to. Put it another way, that was one of the main points of the civil rights movement, was not to break the rules, was not to change, to overthrow the system, but to actually vote so they could participate in the system and then change the rules through internal participation. So it is the rules that we have to hold sacred. The right to vote, the opportunity to vote, the civil discourse, the civil rights, the civil liberties, and for that matter, the civil discourse. All of those things are the rules.
Okay. 1 minute for your response.
There's been a lot of conversation today about breaking rules that are unjust for whatever reason or another. And I get that and I understand it, and there are times when I might support that even though my overall position is playing by the rules. But my thought on the matter is, as I described, if we are able to redefine what the concept of winning is, and redefine, therefore, what the concept and the structure of the rules would be, that we could work our way past some of these individual battles and get to sort of the next level of agreement.
Okay. All right, the next question goes to you first, Bill, and again, you have 2 minutes to respond. It seems like even if you personally have the ability to play by the rules, the much larger and powerful arena of law seems to benefit those who have been most successful, have the most money, and are committed to winning at all costs. In the case where you were dismissed, undoubtedly the lawyers replaced you with someone less ethical. Does this mean that your position, though personally commendable, seems a bit naive in the larger scheme of things? Please defend your answer.
Naive is not a word I would have used to describe that, but still, the premise is correct. I'm certain I don't know this for a fact, but I'm certain, given history, that I was replaced by another engineer. But the fact that I was dismissed because of that points out, it's an example that points out that yes, the law profession is huge and powerful and well-funded and well-connected, and much of the Congress of the United States is full of lawyers and they write laws to suit themselves, I'm sure of it. But the case of the expert witness is a small slice of the lopsidedness, in my view, of that situation. And my being excluded from a particular case is a small piece of that, in my view, and it in fact freed me up, if you'd like, to approach a different case where we could talk more about playing by the same set of rules.
Okay. 1 minute for a response.
And I think whether it's the law profession or the engineering profession, it's the ethical responsibility that has to win in the long run. The ethics of it are what matter. And in the long run, it prevails. If you follow your ethics, my mother was a lobbyist, everyone hates lobbyists, but the reason she was successful for many, many years is they knew they could trust her. She was giving them the straight answer, even from her perspective, and over the long run, it paid off. And the same thing is true with lawyers and what Bill was saying about engineers. If you do the right thing in the long run, it will work.
Okay. The next question is for you. You assert that it is a complex, long-term process to learn to play by the rules. Is it each our responsibilities to learn to evaluate whether these rules that govern our behaviors are good or legitimate? Why or why not?
Yes, it is our responsibility to question these rules to see whether they're good or legitimate. But part of that is recognizing the overarching purpose of having rules, like I heard references to the democratic process. You have to believe in that process. You have to believe in, even if you lose, you believe in the process first. You believe in free speech, and even if the other side is saying something you don't like, free speech is what you believe in and what you follow. That is the long-term process that I'm hoping we as a country and the students I teach can adopt and apply in their lives.
Okay. 1 minute for a response.
That one is pretty hard for me to rebut. Yes, I agree mostly with what Dan says, is that yes, the rulemaking is deeply ingrained and complex and many facets to it and so on in the society, but I think that has happened over time, and the reason that it has, it has been recognized how important the rules are. And so what I'm thinking about is, and talking about in my essay here, is given that they are so important, how can we adjust them in order to cause the shared win that I have been speaking?
Okay. And then our final question for this round goes to you, Bill. Your argument is that some rules seem to be better than others. You mentioned engineering versus legal system. So do you argue that some rules should always be followed but others not? Who gets to decide which rules we follow?
First of all, no, I don't. I'm not saying that all rules should be followed and others not. And I do want to be clear about one thing. In my comment about engineers versus lawyers, I am not picking on lawyers or as individuals or being for engineers as individuals. I am saying that the rules that they are obliged to follow is the subject of my bias on the subject. So to say that means that only engineers' rules should be followed and not lawyers' rules should be followed is not correct. But here we have a conflict talking about placing the client first versus placing the public, protection of the public first. Both lawyers and engineers have a long list of ethics rules spelled out in their code of conduct. Many of them are the same. Don't take bribes, or bribes rather. Be competent, those sorts of things. They're the same, but there are some that conflict, and this is one of them. And I think that this then provides fertile ground for looking at the idea of restructuring rules to end up with a shared win.
And you have 1 minute for a response.
Well, I guess I apologize to everybody if you were expecting a debate rather than one big unified agreement, which it seems like we all are. But actually, where I think Bill's position is right is there aren't any alternative facts. The facts are the facts, and that's not something they can be debated. There's a lot of things surrounding facts and the way they're presented and how they're favored and how you draw the picture where there can be differences. But there are some strict rules about what's right, and courts, for the most part, enforce those in the rules of evidence.
Okay, that concludes the questions for this round. Each of you will now have 1 minute to make your closing statement. And because you won the coin toss, Dan, you will go first.
In the end, playing by the rules is really about human interaction, what Rousseau called the social contract. He stated the strongest is never strong enough to remain always in charge, unless they transform strength into right and obedience into duty. Legitimacy and trust are earned when everyone, including the winners, plays by the rules. Civil rights, civil liberties, civil discourse provide more voice and more opportunity even to those who lose. By playing by the rules, we develop the social capital that fosters understanding, cooperation, and trust, all characteristics necessary for a just society to function effectively.
Thank you. And now for your closing statement, Will.
We have heard tonight observations about unjust rules that need to be broken. And the only way to change the rules is to win. And even about a judge who unfortunately would bend the rules if he felt it was justified. As good as these arguments are, they all, in my view, have a soft spot. They all look backwards in the rearview mirror, if you like. It reminds me a little bit of the old line that generals always fight the last war. I suggest that by recasting the concept of rules and of winning, we can improve our concept, we can improve our collective life experience down the road. We can say, hey, wait a minute, this win or rules thing is, or at least it should be, a false binary. Then we can apply our creativity to the development of new styles of rules and new criteria for winning, resulting in a shared win.
All right, thank you to you both. We will now begin voting for round 2, so get out those ballots again, and the scouts will be coming around to collect your vote for this round. Please remember to submit any questions that you might have for our final round of debate. There's a note section in your program that you can jot that down on and put it in the bucket with your ballot. Okay, so after you have cast your ballots, it is time for an intermission for us to tally all of those up. So we will have about a 15-minute intermission. There are refreshments out in the lobby area, as well as some merchandise for you to take a look at. We will flash the lights out in the hall when it's time for you to return. All right?
My dad read it.
No, it's fine. Just, I'm usually zoomed in enough that I can't. Did you get shot?
We're getting there. The voting is the hard part because everybody does it so quick. Come on, slow down. Hold it carefully. Yeah, you. Who are you?
Everything's going. I got some nice tight shots. I've got some audio issues here, but
Yeah. Audio issues always fun.
especially right in the middle.
Yeah, good luck. Thanks for your help. Yeah.
Settling back in, I just want to thank you so much for those of you that did submit questions. We actually had some very good submissions, and we are going to use one of them, so thank you so much for doing that. And now I get the great pleasure of announcing the winners from round 1 and round 2. From the first round, I would like to congratulate, AJ. And from the second round, our winner is Dan. If you'd both make your way up, please. Okay, and the most nerve-wracking part of the whole evening is I have to do a live coin toss to determine who goes first. This is what I'm nervous about. So, if it is heads, AJ will go first. If it is tails, Dan will begin. All right, it's tails, so Dan goes first. Thank you for clapping for my coin toss. I really appreciate that. Okay. So in this session of questions, again, each debater has 2 minutes to answer the question, and then the opponent will have 1 minute to have a rebuttal. And we'll have 4 questions posed to each of you, starting with you, Dan. First question. Every time you fail to live up to the true commitments you make to yourself and others, you undermine your self-confidence and your perception of yourself. You also undermine your success by suppressing your natural potential. You hamper your leadership influence and ability to produce potentially game-changing results. So in light of the potential of such significant personal and professional losses, tell us why you don't think that the best route is to take whatever steps are necessary to win, including breaking the rules.
My wife suggested that it might have been better that I lost the last round. I think that actually character is built by losing, and I understand that if it could damage your self-confidence if you lose too often. But there certainly is something to character is seen when you lose, not when you win. And if you can stick with your values and follow through, that's where you find it. I thought Bill had some really good ideas about hope. That's where the hope comes. That's about the future. Is if you know these rules are there and you can rely on them and that they're not static but they're getting better, that is maybe how you build your self-confidence and forge through difficult times. And I know I had some myself when I was younger, similar to AJ as far as coming out of law school. I didn't get a job, and the job that I worked really hard and thought I had, I didn't get and had to drift around for a while, but it worked out really well in the end because I got out a lot. So.
Okay, and for a response, AJ.
Yeah, I think your character is obviously important and it's built by adversity, but I also think that your character is defined by your principles. And blindly following a rule that you don't believe is just doesn't demonstrate character. It lets down your character. It lets down your morality. In fact, following your principles to ensure that the rules are better is more, I think, just and more a demonstration of your character. I don't think that it's ever valuable to just follow a rule because it's the rule. And I think that we envision that already. I think our system envisions that, correct? I mean, the Constitution, our founding document, what did they do right when they signed it? They added 10 things, right? Like they realized that they had already missed some points. They realized that it had to change, and they set fundamental principles. Those principles dominate how the rules operate. But if the rules are unjust, I think you have to follow your principles and your character, and follow your morals, and you have to win to change the rules.
Thank you. And now a question for you, AJ. One argument for why winning is more important is that there is a higher form of justice that transcends the rules established by societies and enforced sometimes unfairly. But what if my vision of justice conflicts with that of my neighbor? Don't we use the same rules that you want to overthrow to avoid this conflict?
Well, I don't think I necessarily believe that you always have to break the rules to improve them, but I think that you do have to win. And that's the difference. Is if we have different conceptions of justice, then our system says, okay, go present them. Win those arguments. Either win them in court or win them in an election. So you can still have incremental change while saying that the rules are unjust, but you still have to win if you're going to get better rules. You fundamentally cannot change the rules just by asking for leadership and power to be benevolent towards you. It doesn't happen. As I said earlier, power concedes nothing without a demand. Those demands must be made, and in some cases, rules must be broken so people understand the nature of your demand and your dissatisfaction with the rules.
Okay, and for a rebuttal.
I think there's maybe a disagreement on what the rules actually are. The rules it's not a matter of blind adherence to doctrine. It's having fundamental values and underlying values that we can follow. So if you look at something like the Constitution, those are rules. The Bill of Rights is rules, and those rules are written to protect those who didn't win. The whole idea of the Bill of Rights is to protect those who lost. The winners can protect themselves.
Okay. Our next question comes to you, Dan. Martin Luther King advocated that the oppressed break the rules of social and economic injustice. Was he wrong to do so? If so, why is his statue placed on the mall in Washington, D.C.? What would our country look like today if he had not advocated nonviolent civil disobedience?
I think that's actually evidence of the importance of the rules. The fact that his statue is in our nation's capital, he didn't overthrow our country, he changed our country. Civil disobedience is really about forcing those in power to recognize the injustices they're imposing on others. It's not about defeating those in power, it's about convincing them to follow their own rules. That's what the rule of law is. Rule by law is the top telling the bottom what to do. Rule of law is that everyone, including the powerful, follow the rules. And what Martin Luther King did was said, you aren't following your own rules. You are not following the Declaration of Independence that said all people are created equal. And I want you to recognize what you're doing, and when average citizens in America recognized it, that's when the rules changed.
Okay, and a rebuttal?
Well, I think MLK is a great example, similar example to my Thoreau example earlier, which is, yeah, it's great to follow the rules if you have a chance to have a say in the rules. But what MLK was fighting for was having a say. He didn't have an ability to make any rules. He didn't have an ability to change it, so he had to highlight it. And the way he highlighted it was by demonstrating the injustice of the rules. Yes, the rules envision changing, and our rules, the notion of rule of law and our Constitution envisions that idea. But we haven't lived up to that from our founding. Yes, the Declaration says all men are created equal, but the Constitution includes a slavery clause. We haven't been adhering to that notion and those principles, and Martin Luther King was calling out to our principles and saying, the rules do not match our principles. So he had to win to change those rules.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is for you, AJ. We've all heard about that person in the workplace who takes credit for someone else's idea in order to win the boss's approval and improve his or her chance of a raise or promotion. Is that breaking any rules? And if so, what are the rules that are being broken? If not, explain why such behavior is not breaking any rules and would be justified because it's more important to win.
I would say that behavior may or may not break company rules. It may not break policy, but it certainly breaks what I consider a fundamental principle, which would be honesty. But I've also said that those are not absolute. I gave the example of your grandmother buying you socks and you being thankful for them, saying, nice, I appreciate these, even though you didn't really want socks. I think those are fine to do. I think you have to adjust your principles, or you have to adhere to your principles when you're looking at the rules. And in this case, probably that person did not break a rule, but I think that they broke a moral principle, and it would be important to say, hey, maybe we should change these rules to adopt this moral principle and say, don't take credit for other people's work, don't dishonestly get yourself a promotion.
Okay, and for a rebuttal?
I think, again, the characterization is that the moral principles are the rules. Those are the ones you're going to follow. They call it the golden rule for a reason. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So you follow those moral principles, and that is your guide. But those are rules. Those are things we teach. We want our citizens and our youth and our citizens in general to follow and believe in. And that's what the rules are.
Okay, thank you. All right, now it's time for, this is our audience question. It says, when I look at the audience and speakers, we look financially stable, older, and white. Do you think the demographic we are missing tonight would say it's possible to win by following the rules?
I guess, I don't know if they would say it, but I would hope that they could see the possibilities. That if you actually look at it, AJ was completely correct about what the Constitution said originally and how we've amended. But if you really look back from Hammurabi's Code to Confucian philosophy to Magna Carta, all of those are terribly flawed ideas. But they were rules that evolved and changed and grew. And I think I can confidently say, and I don't know if they would, but I hope they would, to say things as terrible as they are better now than they were 50 years ago, and way better now than they were when there was slavery. And that things are changing, and they're better now than they are in Syria and Myanmar and Belarus, where rules are not followed and the powerful can do anything they want.
Okay, and for a rebuttal?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. When I look at the audience and speakers, we look financially stable, older, and white. Do you think the demographic we are missing tonight would say it's possible to win by following the rules?
I think they would say in certain instances, yes, you can win by following the rules, but we have seen currently attempts at disenfranchisement of the exact population we're talking about. I live in Georgia, I've seen it being passed right now, and I think those folks recognize that their ability to change the rules within the rules is being taken away. Now that's in defiance of a principle that we should hold dear, which is participation and mass participation in democracy. But if they're denied the right to vote, what is their other option? They have to highlight that injustice. And how do you do that? By breaking the rules, or by highlighting that the rules are unjust, whether by breaking them or by trying to win over people with just your arguments and showing that the injustice is prevailing.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for you, AJ. W.C. Fields said, anything worth having is a thing worth cheating for. Different people put different values on what anything is worth, and therefore there is no level playing field in regard to playing by the rules or winning. If your adversary or opponent thinks something is worth cheating for but you don't, where does that leave you? Is your only choice to match your opponent's behavior, whether it's playing by the rules or not? How does that affect your position?
I think that you can still rely on your principles. This, for some reason, brings me to the ideas of the Geneva Conventions and our rules of war. Now, if your opponent is not abiding by the rules of engagement and the rules of war, if they're mistreating POWs, if they're assassinating people who are hostages, that's not something that you want to do, because if you descend to that level, you're ensuring that they're going to continue to do that. The idea is that you uphold principles to say these principles matter and that these rules matter, but the rules are backed by these principles, backed by moral principles. And so the idea of just cheating for acquisitiveness was never my intention. That's not in my essay, that's not my concept. The idea of cheating is not what I'm after. My idea is not about transactional engagement. My concept is simply that if you want the rules to be better, breaking them or not, you still have to win.
Okay, and for a rebuttal?
That's the exact point. If your enemy is doing things that are unethical or wrong, you should not descend to their level to do the same thing, because if you win that way, you have just, what have you won? You become like them. And you could take it to the extreme example of war and the Nazis, but it could also be any group of people that believes their cause is so just and so right that they no longer have to follow any of the moral principles because their ideas prevail over everything else.
Our final questions for the evening will actually be questions that were posed by the contestants themselves. So with that, AJ, we have your question for Dan.
Okay. For what reason should we believe that the rules or the rulemaking process was done fairly?
Because you believe in it because those who do have the power follow their own rules. And as much as they made those rules, you can hold them to it. And at least there's something to hold on to there. So if the rulemaking process is unfair, you can fall back on the fact of civil discourse, civil discussion, civil rights, where you can complain about it. And if they're following the rules, they have to let you complain. They have to let you participate, and maybe they will realize if they have to live up to their own principles, they're going to have to let you in.
Do you have a rebuttal?
I would say in the contrary in some cases, that yes, that might be a noble principle, freedom of speech, and that's one that we should uphold, but those in power don't always have to abide by that. I certainly watched in this past summer many curfews called and many public safety arguments made to deny that freedom of speech, to highlight injustices that were going on. So I don't think that the rules always are upholding those principles, and when they fall short of those principles, then yes, we must win to change those rules.
Okay, thank you. And now time for your question for AJ.
Well, I guess my question would be the other side of the same coin. Assuming the rich and powerful have all the power and they can do anything they want, if you fight them, you're going to lose. So what is there if not the rules to help those who don't have power?
I think that there are rules that exist that keep people from getting that power and from approaching it. And that's why, in some cases, you break the rules to highlight the injustice for others who may not be aware of that injustice. You are trying to prevail, you are trying to win in engagement and win over hearts and minds. That can win you elections. But if you're denied participation, and that's certainly been occurring and has occurred in the past, if you don't even have access to the process, how are you ever going to get better rules? And the only way you can do that is by winning. Now that winning might take, like I said, the form of breaking rules. It might take the form of just trying to win hearts and minds. But if you don't have that access and the powerful are able to silence you, and they are, then you have no other recourse but to win in order to get those rules changed.
Thank you, and then for rebuttal.
Again, the question would be if you don't have any rules, then the way they silence you is the way they do it in Myanmar and the way they do it in Syria. And the question would be, when Nelson Mandela fought against the powers that be in South Africa, or Gandhi fought against the British in India, all of those cases, he was throwing their own rules back at them, saying you need to change who you are and adjust your rules if you're going to live up to what you believe in. If there are no rules and no limits, then you have Putin and Belarus and Syria, etc.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the question round. You now each have 2 minutes to make your closing remarks. We will start with you since you won the coin toss, Dan.
Playing by the rules has to be more important than winning. For there to be legitimacy and protection of minority interests, people have to believe in the process, the system, the rules, more than they believe in their own individual interests. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Winning without rules is absolute power, so winning without rules is corruption. Winning not tempered by rules, like ideas, process, values, becomes the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. When the cause is above the rules, this leads to the heart of darkness. Revolutions like the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, The Cambodians under Pol Pot, all of those things fought for what they thought were tremendously just equality causes, and the result was chaos and terror. On the other hand, when we had reform and adjustments over time, slowly but surely, those in power ceded some power, and we do Magna Carta, the Constitution, amendments to the Constitution, the way things have changed over time. Slowly but surely, things do actually get better. It's not better yet, it never will be. That's why it's the climb. That's why you continue to fight those fights when you can. If civil disobedience becomes corrupt when you take the law, not when you object to unjust laws, but when you start to decide your rules are your ideas are the only ones that matter, and you reject everyone else's ideas because everyone thinks they're right. And that's what civil discourse is all about, discussing, listening, and finding some sort of compromise in between.
All right, thank you very much. And now for your closing remarks, AJ.
Yeah, I actually like some of the examples that Dan gave. I certainly believe that there are revolutions. My father is a refugee from the Cuban Revolution. There are revolutions that started off with noble principles and causes and then turned into repressive dictatorships. But he also gave some examples of the French Revolution and the founding of the United States. Well, those were based on very egalitarian principles, right? They're the principles that we hold are dear in the Enlightenment, the idea of these freedoms and the idea of democracy. But we know that those were flawed states when they began because they did not include people who could not make the rules. Slaves had no ability to make the rules. And yes, it is better now, but is it better because the slaves just asked politely and awaited benevolence? No, it's not better because of that. It's better now because people fought against the rules. And when the South tried to break the rules of being in this country, they lost that and they lost those rules, and now we made better rules. We added rules that increased freedom, that more approached those principles that we had. But the only reason we were able to do that is because people were willing to break the rules and people were willing to highlight injustice in service of better rules. So I think we all come to this from a fairly similar point, and yes, we might just be engaging in a semantic argument about rules and about winning. But I think fundamentally we have to say that if the rules don't follow our principles, then we have to win in order to change them. And as I've said before, this is not a call for anarchy, it is not a call for individual moral relativism. What I'm saying is that the only way that the rules change is by demand, and the only way that you get that demand acceded to is by winning.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to you both. Great job. Okay, so now it's time once again for you to cast your ballots. We have the scouts back in here to come by and collect those. And we will just take a minute to count those. So we're just going to stay in here. You can chat amongst yourselves. One thing that I would ask you to do also is to take a minute to fill out the feedback survey that is in your program. We would greatly appreciate it if you would give us any feedback or comments. There's white boxes on the tables right outside. So on your way out tonight, you can drop those comments in. again, while we're having a minute here, just take a look at that survey in your program. We would greatly appreciate you taking a minute to fill that out for us. If you still have a ballot, would you just raise your hand and we will get a scout over to you to collect that? Anyone else? Great. All right, so they're just going to take a minute to tally those votes. Chat amongst yourselves, fill out that fun survey. We would greatly appreciate it. Just give us a minute. gave me the opportunity for some self-promotion. My podcast is called Flyover Logic. It's super fun. You can find it on any platform where you listen to podcasts. So yeah, take a listen. Thanks for that. What would you like? I don't have a hootenanny prepared for you ladies. I'm sorry. They also suggested a coin flipping contest. I don't have enough coins.
Give us an idea of your topics.
Okay, yeah, sure. So we have done a series of interviews. We just finished up a series of interviews for Springboard for the Arts and Rethos, an organization that's promoting Auditorium County and the area. So we did a series of interviews with people who are either from here and went to an urban area or came here from an urban area and just looked at what that experience was like for them and how rural culture impacted their outlook. We've talked about guns, we've talked about abortion, we've talked about voting rights, we've talked about the Constitution. Like we hit it all of the things that you're not supposed to talk about at the table, right? Those are the things that we try to do, and coming from two different political perspectives, just trying to model respectful conversation and that you can actually have productive conversation even if you don't agree. You can find some common ground somewhere in the middle. So yeah, take a listen. Thank you. All right, so first we will award our bronze medals. So first we have Angela. If you would come forward, please. Come on up, and then we'll just have you stay up here when you arrive. And then Bill, would you come forward, please? They receive hundreds of submissions for this essay contest, and so to be in the top 4 is just such an honor, so that's so great. Congratulations to you both. Okay, our silver medal second place winner is AJ. And that means that the winner of the 28th Annual Great American Think Off is Dan. I guess that part's not in the script, that how we end this. So thank you again, all of you, for being here. And I do invite all of you back to the Cultural Center for our reception. It's just a couple blocks away. New York Mills is small enough, you can't miss it. Go towards the water tower and you'll find us. So thank you again. Please give us those surveys on your way out, and let's do this again next year.
What was the name of the podcast?
Flyover Logic.
Flyover Live.
Flyover's one word.